The rain didn't fall that night, it wept. It ran down the mansion's tall windows like tears that had nowhere left to go. Inside, the glow of a single lamp threw long shadows across a man's face, Richard Carrington, a name whispered across New York for his empire of steel and glass towers. Yet here, in his own house, even his heartbeat seemed to echo with sorrow. He sat slouched in a large armchair, staring at the portable monitor on the table beside him. A faint medical beat played like a broken lullaby. It came from the room above, where his 7-year-old son, Ethan, lay asleep under machines that hummed through the endless rain. Richard hadn't stepped outside in weeks. His empire could run itself, his board could hold their meetings, but none of it mattered if the boy upstairs didn't open his eyes again, not to see, but just to smile. The mansion, once filled with warmth and music, now smelled of disinfectant and silence. Even the piano in the main hall was covered with a sheet, untouched since his wife's funeral 2 years ago. "You can build buildings that scrape the sky, Richard," she had said once, her laughter echoing through his memory, "but nothing makes a home taller than the heart that lives in it." That heart had crumbled the day she died, and the rest followed, his faith, his strength, his nights. Before the story deepens, take a second to comment where you are watching from. Comment your country or state below. Let's see how far this story can travel tonight. And if stories like these touch your soul, hit like to let others find it too. At 6:47 a.m., Maria Dawson, the mansion's maid, arrived for her morning duties. She'd been working there only 6 months, but the routine felt sacred: clean the hall, refresh the flowers, switch out the newspapers no one read anymore. Every corner of the mansion carried an ache too heavy to dust away. Maria wasn't new to silence. Being a single mother had taught her to live with the sound of longing. But there was something unnerving about the quiet inside this house. Even the footsteps of the staff echoed differently, tiptoeing on grief. Richard rarely spoke to anyone. When he did, his words were drenched in weariness, like someone carrying an invisible weight. But Maria didn't judge. She saw in his tired eyes the same kind of nights she once had when her daughter went missing, 10 long years now since Emily disappeared one summer afternoon in Georgia. As she dusted the study that morning, her cloth brushed a framed photo from the bookshelf. It fell face down, the glass cracking slightly against the hardwood. She bent down, muttering softly, "Oh dear," and then her breath caught. It wasn't the frame that shocked her. It was the photo inside it. There, pressing against the broken glass, was the smiling face of her missing daughter. Maria froze. The photo was old, worn at the edges, but she would have known that face anywhere: Emily, barely 8, wearing the same plaid dress she disappeared in. Her hands started to tremble, the duster slipping to the floor. There, scrawled on the back of the picture in neat handwriting, were 5 words that shattered her heart all over again. "Summer with Dad, 2015. The room seemed to spin. Maria clutched the edge of the desk, her chest tightening. "Dad?" The word echoed like thunder in her mind. But Emily never. She never wrote that word about anyone but me. Her pulse roared in her ears as she stood there, staring at the photograph that shouldn't exist in this house. Somewhere above, through ceiling and sorrow, a faint cough drifted down, the sound of a boy who hadn't laughed in months. Maria turned toward the door, the photograph still clutched in her trembling hand. Every instinct told her to walk away, to keep her job, to stay silent, but a mother's heart doesn't listen to reason. It listens to the echoes of its own missing child. The hallway outside was dimly lit, lined with portraits of ancestors long gone. The family's faces watched as she climbed the sweeping staircase, each step heavier than the last. The scent of antiseptic grew stronger as she neared Ethan's room. She paused outside, hearing faint music, a gentle hum of "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star," played on a small piano, each note slow and uncertain. Her hand hovered over the doorknob. Then a small voice from inside called out, clear yet soft. "Miss Maria, you found the picture, didn't you?" Her breath hitched. Slowly, she pushed the door open. Ethan sat by the window, his small frame wrapped in a light blue blanket, fingers gently tracing the keys of a miniature piano. His eyes, cloudy and unfocused, turned toward the door as if he could see her there. "How do you?" Maria whispered, unable to finish. Ethan smiled faintly, his head tilting. "I heard you crying," he said simply. "You cry like her. Like the girl in the photo." Maria's heart splintered again. You know her." He nodded. "She used to sing to me in the hospital. Her voice made me forget the pain. Dad said she was my angel." His words trembled as he spoke, small and careful. "But angels aren't supposed to leave, right?" Maria's throat tightened. She wanted to speak, to ask how he knew her daughter, but before she could, the monitor beside him beeped sharply. Ethan clutched his chest, and for a moment the mother in her, long buried under servitude and grief, rose in pure instinct. She rushed forward, kneeling beside him, her hands trembling over his. "Breathe, sweetheart, it's all right," she said, smoothing his hair back. The moment she touched him, a strange calmness filled the air, almost as if something unseen had recognized her too. The door creaked open behind them. Richard Carrington stood in the doorway, his eyes hollow and red. He didn't ask why she was there. He simply froze, staring at the photograph still clutched in her hand. "Where did you get that?" he asked, voice low, cracking at the edges. Maria turned the picture toward him, her lips trembling. Why do you have this?" "This is my daughter." Richard's jaw tightened. For a long moment, he said nothing, his gaze fixed not on Maria, but on Ethan, whose hand still rested in hers. "Because," he said finally, each word slow like it cost him to say, "she saved my boy's life." Maria's head spun. "Saved his life? What do you mean?" Richard stepped closer. "Not now," he murmured, his face collapsing into something between agony and apology. "He needs rest." But Ethan's small voice interrupted him. "No, Dad," he whispered, squeezing Maria's hand. "She deserves to know." Richard looked down at his son, pale, fragile, too wise for his age, and then at Maria. The room filled with silence again, but it wasn't heavy this time. It was trembling. She was more than just a photo, wasn't she? Maria said, tears streaking down her cheeks. "You've known all along." Richard took a deep breath that shuddered on the way out. "There are things you don't understand yet," he said quietly. "But I swear to you, Maria, everything I did because of her. Because of your Emily." Hold on before we continue, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. These stories bring hearts together from every corner of the world. And if you haven't yet, tap subscribe, because what happens next will break your heart and heal it at the same time. Maria looked at him, her voice trembling. "Because of her? What happened to my baby, Mr. Carrington?" The billionaire's eyes glistened as lightning flashed through the window, painting them both in pale silver. "She gave something no one ever should have had to give," Richard whispered. Maria shook her head, backing away, her heart hammering. "What are you saying?" Richard's voice cracked as he looked to his son. "She gave him light, when the world took hers away." The room fell into stunned silence. Maria sank to her knees, clutching the photograph to her chest. Outside, thunder rolled deeper across the city, as if heaven itself mourned what she had just begun to realize. And then came the child's voice again, soft but sure through the rhythm of the rain. "There's more, Miss Maria," Ethan said, lifting his blind eyes toward her. "Dad never told you what really happened to her that night." The storm had passed, but the silence it left behind was louder than thunder. Richard Carrington stood in the hallway, the faint light from a chandelier falling over his face, pale, marked by sleepless nights. Downstairs, the scent of morning coffee mixed with the echo of a piano key that had pressed itself accidentally during the night, a haunting reminder of music long gone. He hadn't slept. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw the same image, a little girl's photograph in Maria's trembling hands. Emily. The name whispered in his mind like a prayer too painful to say aloud. Upstairs, Ethan coughed softly in his sleep. Richard walked toward his son's room and paused at the half-closed door. The boy looked smaller than he remembered, fragile, like porcelain that could break if grief touched it too roughly. He turned off the monitor light, sat beside the bed, and brushed back Ethan's hair. "Your angel's picture showed up," he murmured. "Maybe that means she's closer than I deserve." In the corner of the room, the music box still played faintly, its tune almost shy, the same song Emily had once sung during her stay in the hospital. Richard felt the weight of every breath. The irony was cruel. Money could buy anything, except the one thing his child needed most. "Daddy?" Ethan's voice came softly in the dark. "Yes, buddy," Richard whispered. "Was that her? The lady who cried by my bed?" Richard froze. His throat went dry. "You were dreaming." Ethan shook his head against the pillow. "No, Daddy. I heard her voice again tonight. She said not to be afraid." Richard rubbed his face, his composure shattering for a moment. "She's just watching over you, son." But deep down, something older than reason stirred, the echo of a promise unkept, the face of a mother who never found closure. At dawn, Maria arrived. Her footsteps faltered as she passed the portrait of Richard's late wife. Every morning, she greeted the woman silently, as though asking permission to serve the home she mothered. But today, guilt pressed down heavier than the morning air. She walked into the kitchen, her eyes swollen from crying. The photograph still haunted her dreams, her lost daughter's smile, preserved behind strangers' walls. "Mrs. Dawson." The butler's voice broke her trance. He pointed toward the study. "Mr. Carrington's waiting for you." Her heart raced. She walked slowly down the corridor, where every picture frame reflected pieces of her fear. Inside the study, Richard sat with both hands clasped tightly against his forehead. He didn't look up. "You didn't sleep last night, did you?" "I couldn't," Maria admitted quietly. "I need to know, Mr. Carrington. Where did you get that photograph?" Richard nodded toward the chair opposite him. "Sit. Please." She sat down, her hands shaking in her lap. The ticking of the grandfather clock suddenly felt like someone counting her heartbeat. "It came from Ethan's medical records," he said at last. "A child's file, donated cornea, Georgia Hospital, 2015. Maria blinked. "Georgia? That's where she disappeared." Richard's voice broke. "She was there when Ethan's transplant happened. Her cornea gave him back the light." Her breath caught, her eyes glistening. "So she's gone." Richard nodded silently. For a long moment, neither spoke. The sound of rain beginning again outside filled the room like sorrow turning back upon itself. "She saved him," Richard whispered. "And I never had the courage to tell you." Maria's tears fell freely now, her voice trembling. "Why didn't you?" "Because I thought knowing might destroy you," he said. "The truth already destroyed me." If you're feeling this heartbreak, don't leave now, like and subscribe for the next twist. Maria rose slowly, gripping the chair for support. "She was only a child," she said. "She was my child." He nodded. "I know. I tried to find you after the surgery, but your address was gone. The hospital said the mother had vanished. They handed me the photo the day she passed." The memory came back to him like broken glass, Emily lying in the hospital bed, her weak smile, the way she whispered before the end, "Tell my mom she did good." But he had never found her mother. Until now. Maria pressed her palms against her face, shaking with grief. She must have been so scared. "She wasn't," Richard said fiercely. "She was braver than any adult in that hospital. She kept asking if the boy, my son, would see colors again. He swallowed hard. I promised her he would. For a moment, they just stood in raw silence, two parents connected by loss, neither villain nor savior, only survivors of pain too deep for words. I need to see him, Maria finally said. Richard hesitated. He's resting. I need to see the boy my daughter gave everything for. Reluctantly, he nodded. Ethan was awake when they entered. He sat by the window again, fingers grazing the piano keys. He smiled faintly when he heard Maria's voice. You came back, he said softly. Maria knelt beside him. Yes, sweetheart. I did. Ethan lifted a small hand to her face, tracing her tears gently. You cry like her, he whispered again. When she sang to me, she cried too. Maria's lips trembled. She sang to you? He nodded. Before my surgery, she told me stories about angels who heal children. She said if I ever saw a sunrise, I should thank the sound of rain. Tears blurred Maria's vision. That's what I used to tell her when storms scared her. The boy smiled as if hearing something beyond them both. Then it is you. She said you'd come when I needed her most. Richard stood in the doorway, unable to breathe. He had spent years seeking control, yet here stood two souls healing each other in ways he never could. Ethan turned toward him. Dad, can we show her the box now? Richard froze. Ethan, not now. Please, Ethan whispered. She should know. Maria's curiosity pulled her closer as Richard reluctantly opened the drawer beside the piano bench. Inside lay a small wooden box, worn smooth from constant holding. He passed it to her without a word. She opened it with trembling fingers. Inside were hospital wristbands, a paper butterfly folded clumsily, and a letter, addressed to Mommy. Maria gasped, covering her mouth. Richard looked away, guilt crushing his voice. It was found in her hospital drawer after she passed. The nurse mailed it to me, thinking I was family. Maria's tears smeared the ink as she unfolded the note. The childish scrawl leapt out at her. Dear Mommy, the doctors say I might sleep soon. If I do, don't be sad. My eyes are going to help another kid see the stars. Tell him they're pretty. Tell him I'm his friend. Her sob broke the still air, sharp and helpless. She pressed the letter to her heart and rocked slightly, whispering, my baby, my brave baby. Ethan's hand reached out, touching the letter as if drawn to it. I never got to tell her thank you, he said, voice trembling. You just did, Maria whispered. If this moment moved you, don't scroll past. Like and subscribe for more heartfelt stories. The storm outside deepened, thunder rolling like a heartbeat. Richard went to the window, his reflection hollow in the glass. She changed us both, he admitted. And I still don't know how to live with that. Maria rose slowly. By remembering her, she said. By making sure every sunrise means something. Richard nodded but didn't turn. His voice dropped to a murmur. There's something else, Maria. I found something, in the hospital archives. Something that doesn't make sense. Her brow furrowed. What do you mean? He looked back at her, eyes haunted. The surgery report was altered. Emily's death time doesn't match the records. Someone changed the signature. Her heart stopped. Changed? How? I don't know, he said. But it means, maybe she didn't die when they said. The room fell graveyard silent. Maria's fingers loosened from the letter, falling limp at her side. Are you saying? I'm saying there's a chance the truth was buried, Richard said, his voice cracking, and I don't know why. Ethan's eyes opened wider, fear flickering through them. Dad, are they going to take her away again? Richard dropped to his knees beside his son, gripping his small hands. No one's taking anyone away, buddy. Not again. But even as he said it, a gust of wind blew through the half-open window, scattering the folded butterfly across the floor. Maria bent to pick it up, and as she did, something slipped out from beneath it, a crumpled note folded small, ink faded but legible. Her trembling hands opened it. Inside were the words, "Property of Hopewell Institute, Confidential Transfer 2015. She lifted her head slowly to meet Richard's shocked gaze. "What is Hopewell Institute?" she whispered. He stared at her, color draining from his face. That's not a hospital. That's where my wife died." Stay with us for what happens next. Like and subscribe before the secret unravels. The morning that followed was eerily calm. The rain had finally stopped, but the world it left behind looked drained. The mansion's white marble floors gleamed under the thin light pouring through the glass ceiling, yet it felt like standing inside a memory, beautiful, but heavy with something missing. Maria stood by the window of the sitting room, her reflection blurrier than the faint shapes of the city beyond. Her eyes had swollen from a night of crying. The letter Emily wrote, her daughter's final words, was folded neatly inside her apron pocket. She hadn't let go of it since reading it. Across the hall, Ethan's voice echoed softly as he played the same haunting tune on the small piano, a melody learned not from lessons, but memory. Each note trembled with something between sadness and comfort. Richard Carrington hovered by the doorway, silent, afraid to interrupt either of them. He looked at Maria and saw the pain his silence had created. But now there were bigger questions, ones even guilt couldn't answer. "Maria," his voice broke the silence. "There's something I need to show you." She turned slowly, cautious. "Is it about the Hopewell Institute?" Richard hesitated, then nodded. "It's where my wife spent her last months before she passed. And the same place where Emily's file says she was transferred." He nodded again, his eyes dark. "Yes. I never understood why those names appeared together, until I saw that file." He walked to his desk, pulled open a drawer, and handed Maria an envelope, crisp, sealed, stamped years ago with the hospital's crest. "What is this?" Maria asked. Richard's jaw tightened. "It's my wife's final letter. I never opened it. I didn't have the strength." A gust of wind rattled the windows. Maria peeled the seal gently, unfolded the paper, and began reading out loud as Richard turned away, bracing himself. "To my husband and son. If you ever find this, remember love isn't owned or lost, it's borrowed. And if pain returns, it means something unfinished still waits to be healed." Her voice broke. Beneath those words, scribbled faintly at the bottom, was another name written in different ink, almost like it was added hastily before mailing, Emily Dawson. Maria's breath caught. "My daughter wrote her name on this?" Richard turned instantly. "That's impossible. This letter came from my wife's treatment room." "That means they met," Maria whispered, clutching the page. "Emily must have seen her there before she stopped, unable to say the word." Richard took a sharp breath. "If they met, then maybe." Ethan's voice interrupted from the doorway. "She used to tell me about a lady with the same voice as Dad." Maria turned slowly. "What did she say?" "She said the lady told her that one day someone's eyes would make a boy see again, and that when the boy played music, she'd always be near." The adults exchanged a stunned glance. Richard stepped closer. "When did she tell you that, Ethan?" "When I was in the hospital. Before I could see again. She said, 'Tell your dad she kept her promise.'" Maria sank into the couch, crying silently. A promise? Between her lost daughter and this man's dying wife? How could two strangers carry pieces of each other's unfinished stories? If this story moves your heart, pause a second, like and subscribe for the next part of the story. For the first time, Richard looked fragile. "Maria," he said quietly, "I think what connected them wasn't just the surgery, it was love. Both of them wanted someone else to be whole, even if it meant losing everything." He moved toward the mantel, lifting a small locket that had belonged to his wife. Inside was a photo she'd kept near her heart until her last breath, a little blonde boy and a dark-haired girl smiling over hospital trays. "That's them," Richard whispered. "Ethan and Emily. Together. The day before the surgery." He handed it to Maria, whose hands shook as she traced the girl's face. "She looked happy," she murmured. "She was," Richard said. "And after? I think she gave my son not just her sight, but her peace." "I never even got to say goodbye," Maria said, voice trembling. "She didn't either," Richard answered softly. "That's why we need to know what really happened at Hopewell." Later that evening, the mansion felt even quieter than usual. Ethan had fallen asleep in the sitting room, clutching the faded music box. The melody still lingered, echoing faintly through the halls. Maria stood outside by the fountain, staring up at the moon. Richard joined her, his overcoat draped loosely on his shoulders. "Do you think we'll find the truth?" she asked without turning. "We'll find something," he said. "But truth has a way of breaking before it heals." She nodded faintly. "Maybe that's what healing is, knowing the pain won't vanish, but it can soften." A single drop of water splashed from the fountain, rippling the reflection of the night sky. Inside, the old grandfather clock marked midnight. Suddenly, Ethan cried out in his sleep. Richard bolted inside, followed by Maria. They found him trembling on the sofa, clutching his chest, tears streaming down his cheeks. "She was here." Ethan gasped. "She touched my hand and said, 'Tell them I'm not where they think.'" "Ethan, it's okay," Maria whispered, running her fingers through his hair. "No," she said it twice. Ethan insisted. "She said she's somewhere safe, but trapped." Richard knelt beside him. "Where, buddy? Did she say where?" Ethan shook his head frantically. "She tried, but then the lights went out in her place. She said to find the sound of the sea." If you felt that chill, stay with us, like and subscribe before the mystery deepens. Richard looked at Maria, alarm written across his face. "The sea," he repeated. "That could mean the coast. There's a research annex near the Atlantic. They moved some Hopewell patients there after closure." Maria's heart pounded. If she meant that location, it's in Vermont. She could, "No, that's impossible." "She said she isn't where they think," Richard repeated. "If there's even a chance." They both fell silent. The air between them thickened with fear and fragile hope. "I have one contact left in the medical network," Richard said, moving toward the phone. "If she's alive, if there's any record, someone will know." Maria clutched the locket to her chest. Her whole body trembled, not from cold, but hope, dangerous and raw. Richard's fingers hovered over the phone pad, but before he could dial, there was a knock at the front door. Slow. Heavy. 3 times. He looked at Maria. Who would come this late? She shook her head. Richard opened the door cautiously. A woman stood there in a long gray coat, her face half hidden by a scarf. In her right hand, she held an old file folder stamped, "Hopewell Archives." "Mr. Carrington," her voice was soft but fearful. "My name is Dr. Collins. I worked at Hopewell 10 years ago. I think we need to talk." Richard's eyes widened. "It's about Emily, isn't it?" Dr. Collins hesitated. "It's about both of them." Her gaze shifted toward the sleeping boy on the couch. "And it's not just a medical record, it's a confession." Maria's knees weakened. "What do you mean, confession?" The woman stepped inside, locking the door behind her. "There were 2 transplant patients that year. One wasn't supposed to survive, but she did. Don't miss what happens next. Like and subscribe now before the next twist drops." Maria's voice cracked. "Who survived?" Dr. Collins placed the folder gently on the table. "You'll have to see for yourself," she said. "But if I show you this, everything you thought was gone, returns." Richard reached for the file with trembling hands. The label on its edge read two names crossed out, Diana Carrington and Emily Dawson. As he opened it, color drained from his face. Photographs. Dates. Blood test results. And one line handwritten in blue ink by an unsteady hand. Patient transfer successful. Identity confidentiality maintained under guardianship clause. Status, alive. The page slipped from Richard's grasp. Maria clutched the table to steady herself. Ethan stirred in his sleep and, without opening his eyes, whispered. She said you'd find her. The room went cold. Every clock in the house stopped ticking at once. The house was the quiet kind of dark, where every clock sound feels like guilt ticking. The file from Hopewell sat open on the marble table, its contents spilling into the light like uncovered sin. Maria stood beside Richard, unable to breathe. Every page whispered something unthinkable, and somewhere in that whisper lived the one question neither of them dared to voice: if Emily was alive, then where was she? Ethan stirred in his sleep, murmuring softly. She said, the sea was calling. Maria's heart clenched. Richard's fingers traced the blue ink on the final report. Patient transferred, guardianship reassignment. But the signature beneath wasn't the hospital's director. It was Diana Carrington's. His late wife's name. Richard's mind burned. No. That can't be right. Maria stepped closer. Your wife signed for her transfer. Yes, he said, his voice barely a whisper. But she was dying. She couldn't have signed anything after that date. Dr. Collins looked up from her folder, her expression grim. That's why I came here. I was ordered to destroy these files. But I couldn't. Not after what I saw. She pulled out one more document, a faded photograph stapled to the corner. Richard reached for it, hands trembling. It showed two hospital beds side by side. On one lay Diana, pale, fragile, her hand resting weakly on a sleeping child's arm in the next bed. The other bed held a little girl. Emily. She comforted your wife in her final hours, Dr. Collins said quietly. They called each other angels. A silence so heavy it could break filled the room. Maria pressed her hands to her mouth as tears gathered. Emily, my baby. Richard's eyes glimmered with both awe and pain. She stayed with her until... He didn't finish. He couldn't. If this moment touched your heart, like and subscribe before the next truth unfolds. Ethan stirred again, his soft voice breaking the stillness. Dad. Mom said she was proud of the little girl with the brave eyes. Maria knelt beside him, her tremors subsiding. Brave eyes, she whispered, reaching to hold his hand. She said that when she was scared. Ethan opened his cloudy gaze, unfocused but intense. She's still here, Miss Maria. She says you'll see her again where the wind meets the sea. Richard turned to Dr. Collins. Hopewell had a coastal annex, didn't it? The doctor nodded. Vermont coast. But the records say that location was evacuated after a flood 9 years ago. Richard repeated grimly. You're saying it's abandoned now? Yes. But survivors' accounts mention a lone wing that stayed operational, hidden for private cases. Maria wiped her tears. Then that's where we go. Dr. Collins hesitated. You don't understand. That place wasn't like a hospital, it was a sanctuary for patients hidden under government sponsorships. The children there were used for blind study research, vision tests, neural mapping. Richard's tone sharpened. You're saying they used my wife and her? I'm saying some of those children lived long after their families were told they were gone, she said. Her voice cracked. And one of them still sends letters to Hopewell every Christmas. Maria's breath froze. Letters? We thought they were fakes. They were signed only with one initial, E. Richard felt the air leak from his lungs. E, for Emily. Later that night, the mansion no longer felt haunted, it felt watchful. The storm had returned, soft rain streaming across the garden like memories bleeding through glass. Ethan had fallen asleep again, the music box still pressed to his chest. Maria stepped closer, brushed his forehead, and whispered, "Sleep, sweetheart." Richard walked to the window, staring into the night. "If she's alive somewhere," he said, his tone raw with disbelief, "then everything I thought I understood about her death was a lie. About my wife. About Hopewell." Maria turned toward him. "Maybe it wasn't a lie, Richard, maybe it was a mercy. Maybe the truth wasn't something they wanted you to bear." He leaned his head against the window, the sound of rainfall merging with his broken sigh. "Sometimes," she added softly, "what hurts most isn't that they're gone, it's that we stopped looking." If you believe love never dies, like and subscribe before the next secret breaks. The next morning arrived like a confession written in sunlight. Richard's private jet waited on the Carrington airstrip, its engines humming softly, cloaked in mist. Maria clutched Emily's locket in one hand, the letter in the other. Her faith flickered between terror and hope. Ethan, fragile but adamant, sat between them. "I want to come," he insisted. "You're too young," Richard said gently. "She said I'd need to," Ethan argued. "She said only I can hear her when she calls." Richard's throat tightened. "Your mother used to say the same thing. That love isn't seen, it's heard." Maria nodded, reaching for the boy's hand. "Then he comes." Dr. Collins climbed aboard, clutching the folder. "The Hopewell Annex is off the maps now. Power lines were cut years ago. We'll need to land near the coast and make the rest of the trip by road." The flight passed in heavy silence. Richard stared through the window, lost in half-lit memories, Diana's delicate smile, Maria's trembling faith, the face of the child who had bound them all together. As clouds parted beneath them, the coast appeared, cold, gray, endless. The rain hit them again as soon as they landed. The air reeked of salt and rust. Old buildings sagged under the weight of forgotten time, their signs peeling under decades of wind. Maria's eyes scanned the ruins until she saw it, a small chapel-like structure perched near the water's edge, faded but intact. The bell tower still stood, though its rope swung listlessly in the breeze. "That's it," Dr. Collins whispered. "The annex." They stepped inside. The scent of antiseptic was still faintly in the air, lingering like a ghost. Old hospital beds lined the walls, some with toys resting beside dusty pillows. Ethan clutched Maria's dress. "She's here," he whispered. A soft hum filled the air, the same melody from his music box. Except it wasn't coming from him. Richard froze. "Do you hear that?" Maria nodded, tears forming. "It's her lullaby." The music led them down a corridor half-flooded, lit only by the reflection of lightning through broken glass. At the corridor's end stood a locked metal door with faded paint bearing two letters, EH. "What's behind that?" Maria asked. Dr. Collins' hands shook. "Experimental hold. That's where they kept the children marked unrecoverable." Ethan stepped forward, tugging the lock. "She's on the other side." "Ethan, no," Richard started, but before he could stop him, another sound joined the rain. A faint echo, footsteps, from beyond the door. Maria's heart stuttered. "Someone's in there." Richard grabbed a crowbar from the corner and forced it into the latch. The door screamed open against rust. Inside, the light flickered, dim, erratic. And there she was. A young woman sat in a wheelchair facing the window, her hair long and dark, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Rain spilled down the glass beside her. She didn't turn immediately. Maria's breath left her in a sob. "Emily." The woman slowly turned, her face pale but alive, eyes gentle, vacant, yet softly aware. Her lips tried to form a smile. "Mom," she whispered. The sound shattered Maria. She fell to her knees, sobbing as she crawled forward, touching her daughter's trembling hand. "My baby. They told me you were gone." "They tried," Emily said weakly. "But I promised I'd see you again." Ethan took a step forward, tears falling silently. "You kept your promise, Angel." Richard knelt beside them, his face wet with tears he hadn't allowed in years. He reached out, but froze as he noticed something on her wrist. A worn blue wristband. The tag read, "Property of Project Grace, Diana Carrington Protocol." If this revelation hit your soul, like and subscribe before the next twist unfolds. Richard's trembling hand brushed the band. His wife's name stared back at him like a wound reopening. "Project Grace," he murmured. Emily turned her head weakly. "They said she helped me, taught me to see even after I couldn't." Maria whispered through sobs. "Who, sweetie? Who helped you?" Emily smiled faintly. "Your wife. She said when you find me, tell him I'm not gone either." Richard's knees buckled. Lightning flashed through the cracked window, bathing the three of them in trembling light, mother, child, and man, bound by love and loss too vast to name. The sea outside roared like an ancient truth, rising, crashing, demanding to be heard. And from somewhere deeper in the annex, a second voice, soft, unmistakable, whispered through the corridor. "Richard." It was his wife's voice. The sea roared outside the broken windows like a restless grief, echoing through the hollow of the old annex. Richard stood motionless, staring at the wristband marked Project Grace, Diana Carrington Protocol. The tag trembled slightly in his fingers, its faded ink standing between the living and the dead. Maria knelt beside Emily, overwhelming love and disbelief fighting within her like two warring tides. "It's really you, my baby girl," she whispered, stroking her daughter's hair, thin but warm. Emily's lips parted, but her voice came weak and uneven, shaped by years of silence. "You came, and you brought him," she said, her eyes moving slowly toward Ethan. "Mom said, you both would." Tears blinded Maria. "Who said that, sweetheart?" Emily blinked, confusion dimming her fading strength. "The lady with soft eyes. She said she was waiting for him too." Richard stepped forward, swallowing hard. "Emily, that lady, was my wife, Diana." Emily's faint smile trembled. Then she wasn't lying. Those words landed between them like a quiet thunderclap. Richard's pulse quickened as his mind rewound through a decade of memories. Diana, terminally ill, confined in Hopewell. Emily, transferred into the same wing under secrecy. Both declared deceased within months. Yet here sat proof of something far more haunting than medical coincidence, connection by design. A sudden gust of ocean wind pressed through the cracks in the broken window panes, lifting the faded hospital records from the table. One landed beside Maria's foot, half-soaked from rainwater. She leaned down, unsteady, and froze when she read the origin of transfer, Atlanta, Georgia, Carrington Research Foundation, Donor Recovery Program. Her chest tightened. Georgia. The same state where Emily had vanished 10 years ago. "Richard," she whispered, shaking. "This didn't start here. It started in Georgia. Don't lose this moment, like and subscribe before the truth from Georgia unfolds." He took the document from her trembling hands. Across the page, handwritten notes ran down the side margin. They weren't in a doctor's script, they were letters. Personal. The bottom line chilled him more than the icy air in the room. "Trial of site transfer begins tomorrow. She said yes to save the child. Grace prevails." "Grace," he muttered. "That's what they called it. Project Grace." Dr. Collins stepped back, hands trembling. "Ms. Dawson, Mr. Carrington, Project Grace was never meant to involve live subjects. It was a neurological preservation experiment, an attempt to transfer neural memory from terminal patients to children undergoing sensory loss." Maria's voice cracked. Then Emily's donation, her eyes. Dr. Collins cut in, wasn't just about sight. It was about imprinting emotional memory. Your daughter's mind didn't completely fade. The words hung sharp in the cold air. Maria couldn't breathe. Her hand went to Emily's face, soft, alive, but trapped between two worlds. Ethan stepped closer, clutching his music box. That's why she talks to me when I play, he whispered. It's her memory inside me. Richard reached for his son's shoulder, shocked by the calm certainty in his child's tone. He looked at Emily again, her faint smile, her half-open eyes struggling to hold awareness. Emily, do you remember anything about Hopewell? He asked gently. She nodded weakly. They called her Angel Mother. She told me she was helping me remember my real mom. She said if I listened carefully when I slept, I'd still hear her. Maria's tears fell onto her daughter's hand, but Emily's fingers moved, slowly, deliberately. I did, she whispered. I heard you every night. You said you loved me, even when I was gone. Meanwhile, thunder rolled across the coast, shaking the building's fragile bones. Dr. Collins adjusted her glasses, her voice breaking. Grace wasn't an experiment in healing, it was an exchange. Diana had consented to donate her remaining neurological patterns to one child before her death. The foundation needed a matching case, a dying girl with similar brainwave activity. She gave her memories to my daughter, Maria murmured, processing the impossible truth. Richard sank into the nearest chair. And my wife gave life to her. Two souls, woven through science. Lightning flashed, illuminating Emily's pale face. Somewhere deep in the annex, an alarm, not loud, but steady, began to beep, echoing like a forgotten heartbeat. Ethan looked toward it instantly. She wants us to go there. Maria shivered. Sweetheart, how could you possibly know that? She told me, the boy replied simply. Before we came. In my dream. Richard rose. We follow him. If you're gripped by this twist, pause a second, like and subscribe to stay with the story. The corridor ahead was long, lit by single emergency bulbs that flickered in rhythmic bursts. The scent of old disinfectant hung stale, mixed with salt from the ocean. Ethan led them forward, his tiny steps unwavering, the music box clutched tightly. A locked security door stood ahead. Rusted, sealed, forgotten. Yet when Ethan pressed his hand against the scanner, just instinctively, it blinked green. The lock clicked open. Richard's jaw dropped. How? He carries remnants of her, Dr. Collins explained softly. When Diana's neural patterns integrated through Project Grace, fragments may have transferred into Ethan through the same frequency patterns in her corneal genome. He's the living key. Maria felt her knees go weak. In him, my daughter lives. Not lives, Collins said, choosing her words carefully. Resonates. They stepped through the door. Inside was a circular room filled with rusted equipment, cables tangled around cryostasis pods half buried in salt and dust. Richard's flashlight beam caught a row of name tags on each pod, faded but barely legible. He froze. Diana Carrington. Emily Dawson. Both tags side by side. Both statuses marked active transfer, unverified termination. Dr. Collins gasped. No. This can't be. They should have been declared inactive years ago. Ethan moved toward the pods, the melody from his music box growing louder though he hadn't wound it. As if something deeper was playing it through him. The lights flickered violently. Maria clutched Richard's arm as an electric hum filled the space. Emily, still in her wheelchair, looked up toward the sound, her weak voice barely audible. She's here. Richard whispered, Diana. A soft, human warmth rippled through the air. Then, her voice. Richard. The single word came like the echo of wind through water, soft but unmistakable. It wasn't from memory, nor from tape, it was there. Maria swallowed hard. She's speaking. Dr. Collins stumbled backward. No biological audio equipment remains. That voice should be impossible. Richard stepped forward, tears streaking down his cheeks. Diana, where are you? I'm between, the voice answered gently. Our choices bound us. Grace was never meant to separate love, but to preserve it. He trembled. You saved Emily. We saved her, Diana's voice corrected tenderly. But your son, he holds both halves now. You must protect them. The temperature dropped instantly. The lights dimmed to red. Ethan screamed suddenly, the melody from the music box twisting into distorted static. Maria grabbed him, pulling him close. Ethan. Richard reached for his son, watching the boy tremble violently as light from the pod's pulsed. Ethan's eyes rolled back, glowing faintly. Mom, he cried out. It's too bright. Shut down the power. Richard shouted. Dr. Collins ran to the console, flipping switches frantically. Sparks burst across the room. The humming stopped. The darkness returned. Only the sound of their labored breathing remained. Then, silence. Emily's voice broke it softly. She's gone again. Maria hugged her daughter. You're safe now. But deep down, Maria knew the truth. Safety, in this house of miracles, was only temporary. Before the next sacrifice unfolds, like and subscribe to continue their story. Hours later, rain tapered into mist. The storm had drifted inland, leaving the coast muted and silver. They all sat inside the annex, exhaustion etched into their faces. Richard poured coffee for Maria, his hands trembling slightly. I can't stop thinking about what she said, Maria murmured. Protect them. Did she mean Ethan and Emily? Richard nodded slowly. It's both of them now. They share more than blood, they share memory. Dr. Collins approached with a final folder retrieved from the console, marked Confidential, Phase 3, Georgia Return Unit. She laid it on the table. You need to see this. Maria opened it, only to find an address, Street Bridget's Church, Savannah, Georgia. A postscript handwritten and dated just 1 month before Diana's death read. Deliver this when the rain returns to the coast. She'll find her way home. Richard's eyes filled again. That was her handwriting. Then Georgia's waiting, Maria said quietly. Ethan stirred on the couch, half asleep, his voice a whisper. Mom says the church has the last letter. Last letter? Maria asked gently. His small hand tightened around the music box. The one she left for you both. Richard and Maria exchanged a glance, grief, disbelief, and fragile hope blending into a single look that meant only one thing: their journey wasn't over. Dr. Collins stepped toward the window, looking out at the sea. Whatever's in that letter, it ends the circle of Project Grace. But be careful. Why? Richard asked. She turned, face pale. Because if they survived because of love, it means one of them didn't cross alone. Outside, lightning flickered one last time across the horizon, distant, fading, but enough to illuminate something no one had noticed before. On the far side of the beach, half buried in the sand, stood a memorial stone. The inscription barely visible, but the names chiseled side by side, Diana Carrington and Emily Dawson, bound by grace. Maria's breath hitched. It's like they knew this moment would come. Richard whispered, Georgia. As waves crashed beneath the dawn light, the family gathered what remained of the files, of memory, of faith, and began their departure. Behind them, the annex trembled once, then went still, as though closing the chapter it had waited years to end. But just as they reached the door, Ethan paused, turning back toward Emily. She says we have one more sunrise, he whispered. And from somewhere deep within the annex's ruined halls, unseen yet certain, Diana's voice whispered softly through the static. Then let it be the one they never forget. The road from the Vermont coast to Savannah was drenched in fog, each mile unraveling decades of secrets. The tires of the Carrington family's SUV cut through the wet asphalt as silence filled the cabin, a silence not born from peace, but exhaustion too deep to name. Maria cradled Emily's fragile hand in the back seat, her thumbs softly circling her daughter's wrist as though to remind herself that this moment was real. Ethan slept with his head against Richard's shoulder. The music box lay in his lap, its key unwound but humming faintly against the hum of the engine. The sound wasn't mechanical, it was tender, almost alive. As dawn began to creep in through the mist, Richard spoke, his voice low and rough. She told us to find the church in Georgia. If there's something waiting there, it ends tonight. Maria's gaze stayed fixed on the passing trees. Or begins. No one spoke again for the next 2 hours. The drive stretched between disbelief and hope until the Georgia sky, heavy and pale, revealed the outline of St. Bridget's Church, sitting alone on a hill near the coast. Its wooden sign leaned crookedly, faded paint barely reading founded 1889, where light meets grace. They stepped out onto wet ground. The smell of aged pine mixed with lingering rain. Inside the chapel, long-forgotten hymns seemed to hum through the dusty air even though no voice sang. The pews had collapsed in places, candle wax scarred the altar. On the front bench, an envelope rested against a cracked Bible, its edges sealed with red wax. Maria froze. That's her handwriting. Richard stepped closer, his breath shallow. On the front, written in trembling cursive, were 6 words. For the ones who found her. If your heart's pounding, breathe, then like and subscribe for how this truth unfolds. Maria's fingers shook as she broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of parchment, folded once, its ink faded by time. To whoever holds this. If Emily lives, it means grace worked. But grace came with a debt no one prepared us for. The line ended abruptly but continued below in a different pen stroke, lighter, rushed, as if written from a hospital bed. If the memory transfers successfully, protect them both. Because neither will live long without the other. Maria stumbled back, eyes wide. What does that mean? Richard's chest constricted. She's saying, Emily and Ethan. Dr. Collins, who joined them on the journey, stepped forward. The human brain can't hold shared neural links indefinitely. They're codependent now. One heartbeat can affect the other. Ethan stirred awake at her words, blinking sleepily. Mom says it's true, he murmured. Maria turned in confusion. Sweetheart, what? He pointed toward the altar. She's standing there. She said time's almost done. The temperature inside the church dropped suddenly. A gust of wind flung open the side doors. The candle Maria had lit flickered violently, nearly going out. Richard whispered, Diana. A shadow formed near the altar. It wasn't threatening, it was gentle, radiant, like moonlight trapped in human shape. And then it spoke. Richard. The voice was unmistakable. Warm, soft, like every dream he'd buried and tried to forget. Diana, he breathed. Her form brightened faintly. I told you once that love outlives us. You never believed me. Tears gathered in his eyes. I do now. She turned her attention to Maria. You were meant to find her, both of you. What was taken from one heart was meant to heal another. But now, both hearts are tied by me. Maria stepped forward, voice trembling. What happens if one? She couldn't finish. That's why you came here, Diana answered softly. For the confession. If you're still watching, stay close, like and subscribe before the truth shatters everything. Diana's light dimmed slightly. When Hopewell began Project Grace, it was never meant to manipulate life. It was meant to preserve what people lose in death, love, memory, connection. But to make it work, 2 beings had to share one link. She looked at Ethan and Emily. That link was them. Richard shook his head slowly. You're saying, their lives are tied? Yes, Diana whispered. Emily's body carries my neural matrix. Ethan carries her emotional code. Without both, Grace collapses. Maria's sob broke the stillness. Then what do we do? There's a corrective procedure, Dr. Collins interrupted, her voice fading as she looked through the files Diana had left behind. But it hasn't been tested. The letter references a final phase, something called realignment. It reseparates neural transfers, but it requires. She stopped mid-sentence. Requires what? Richard demanded. The heart that anchored the matrix to release itself. Diana's voice shook now. That heart is mine. Maria's hands flew to her chest. But you're already. Not fully, Diana said softly. The algorithm that linked us left my consciousness alive in her, Emily. If I stay, her body will degrade. If I leave, she'll live, but I'll fade completely. A long silence followed. Rain began to pour again outside, pelting against the old windows like desperate knocks. Ethan took a step forward. No, he said firmly, tiny voice cutting through the tension. You can't go. You promised my dream would stay. Diana smiled faintly. It already did. She reached out a faint, glowing hand toward him. You carry my strength now. He shook his head, clutching the music box tighter. I can't do this without you. You can, she said gently. Because love isn't gone when it stops speaking, it stays when you become its voice. Richard fell to his knees before her fading form. Diana, please, there must be another way. I already lost you once. She placed a flicker of light over his chest. You didn't lose me, Richard. You just couldn't see where I stayed. Her tone softened to almost nothing. Remember this, what Grace took apart, love can mend again, in its own time. Then, to Maria, she said quietly, your daughter will live to remember. But don't let her memory become her prison. Set her free. A final rumble of thunder shook the church. The stained glass windows gleamed once, then went dark. Diana smiled, whispering, goodbye, my loves. And just like that, she was gone. The silence that followed was unbearable. The smell of rain blended with the faint scent of lavender, Diana's perfume, once more fading into air. Maria held Emily tightly as sobs racked her. Richard turned away, his hand rubbing his face in disbelief. Ethan's small voice finally broke the stillness. She said the morning's coming soon. Maria lifted her head. What does that mean? He looked toward the church door. She said after this rain, the sunrise will fix what's broken. Before the final sunrise, like and subscribe to follow what love decides next. The storm ended near dawn. Beams of gold light filtered through the church's broken windows, falling upon Emily's face. Her breathing steadied, her skin warm again. The hospital pallor began to fade, replaced by color the world had almost forgotten. Maria whispered a prayer through her tears. Thank you. Dr. Collins checked Emily's pulse. It was strong, rhythmic, whole. It worked, she said in awe. Her system stabilizing. The neural link, it's realigning naturally. Richard dared a small smile for the first time in years. Maybe love fixed what science couldn't. But Ethan, still quiet, walked toward the altar. His music box began to hum again, though no one touched it. Inside, one note played on repeat, a note graceful and serene. Maria walked over. Sweetheart, how's it playing? He turned, eyes misted. She left it for us. Mom said every time it plays, she's near. Outside, the ocean wind calmed. Rays of sunlight broke across the cross hanging above the altar, shedding light on something none of them had noticed before, an inscription carved into the wood beneath it. grace is not the miracle. It's the reminder that we were never meant to walk alone. Maria traced the engraving with her fingers as tears fell softly onto the worn surface. She wanted us to find peace, not answers, she murmured. Richard stood behind her, putting a hand over hers. And peace, maybe, is what she gave us back. Emily stirred awake then, her voice quiet but steady. Mom. Maria rushed to her side. Yes, baby, I'm here. Emily smiled faintly. I had the dream again. She was singing by the sea. Richard's throat tightened. What did she say to you? She said, tell Daddy to stop blaming himself. The storm wasn't punishment, it was permission. To begin again. Richard broke then, the weight of a decade falling off him like rain. For the first time since Diana's illness, he let himself cry freely. Maria reached for his hand. Then let's begin again, before we lose the sunrise. They carried Emily outside, the morning wind wrapping around them like an embrace. The ocean shimmered, golden and endless. Ethan turned his face to the sun and smiled. Behind them, St. Bridget's bell tower tolled once, a soft chime that felt less like farewell and more like thank you. The family stood together at the edge of the water, the billionaire who'd once traded his soul for science, the mother who'd lost everything but found her child, the daughter reborn by grace, and the child who carried the voice of both love and faith. The sunrise bathed them in luminous calm. The kind that doesn't erase pain but transforms it. And though the wind was still, one echo traveled through it, Diana's voice, faint but immortal. You found her because love never lost you. As the church bell echoed one final time across the sea, Maria held Ethan close, whispering what every heart broken by life eventually learns. Grace isn't about second chances. It's about never giving up the first.